something to be said for acknowledging that there's a God in heaven and that He is indeed our Father. But there's something even more exciting than to stand before an assembly of people and talk about being a trusted son. You see, in 2013, I made a bold move to run against Hassan Ali Joho. And if any of you are from Mombasa, you know that when you take on the Sultan, you are taking on a David and Goliath battle. But when I made that decision, the first person I spoke to was my wife. And you should have seen the excitement in her eyes. She was sure that this was a battle to fight. And in my mind, I wasn't. Not because I didn't think that I could take him on, but because of what I had been through. And so the next person that I called was my father. And I said to him, "Dad, this is what I'd like to do." And his response was this. He said to me, "My son, you're a light in the world of government. Keep going." Nothing made Terry happier. Because Terry's picture was now that she had given me the affirmation that I needed, and that Dad had spoken to me the words of wisdom, she could see herself as the glamour girl, 001's first lady. Now, Terry hadn't grown up in a home exposed to politics. In fact, if anything, Terry's probably experienced, and she'll tell you, more politics in the 8 years that we've been together than she ever did in her entire life. Terry didn't know what was coming. And so guess what? We put our 2 coins together, our little silver Nissan Sunny, and we headed out on the campaign trail. Well, on March the 5th, 2013, 10,000 people were behind me against Hassan Joho's 136,000. And we all know how that story ended. But what followed was an amazing time of reflection with my beautiful wife. And so what we did was we went back to campaign headquarters and we told the team that we had put together, "It's over, guys, it's a wrap. We did our best. He won. We didn't." At least we thought. What followed over the next 2 weeks was a time of rest and reflection. But what was most profound about that time was what we were coming back to. When we got back to Mombasa after a time of rest, I turned on my phone and I saw 2 messages. One was from 001 himself, and the other was from his close friend. And the message read, "When you find time, please look for me." And so I did. But I did it thinking, just another politician calling me and telling me, "Let's meet." After all, he had beaten me. What did he need me for? And so he called and said, "Let's meet." And we had breakfast. And he said to me, "Tendai, I want you to come and work with me." And I was like, "Excuse me?" "I want you to come and work with me." And I asked him why. And he said to me, "During the campaign trail, I had a team of people follow you on your campaign. And I listened in, and they listened in to everything that you said. And in this one little village, I came in after you, but you didn't know. And I asked, what is it that he's just said? And they said, wazee mheshimiwa hatujui bana. Huyu jamaa kuja kuzungumza kizungu nyingi. Na ashatuambia kuhusu sijui familia, sijui education, sijui babake, sijui mamake. Sisi tunataka kupiga kura bana. And so he said that conversation remained with him. And on the day that he was forming his cabinet, he was praying. And he couldn't find somebody to be in charge of education. And he remembered that conversation. And he picked up the phone and sent me that message. And a long story short, 2 weeks later, Bible in hand, Terry next to me, and I was swearing an oath as the first executive for education in Mombasa County. That moment on that day, walking into my office, which was an old colonial post office in Mombasa, with crows flying everywhere. I sat at the desk and I looked out the window and my whole life flashed back. You see, what you wouldn't have seen that I'm about to let you into was a time that I had in Lenana School in 1991. You see, now I was at the top of my game. I was at Lenana. I had just passed my KCPE, and all I wanted to do was go to a boarding school. And that I got. So I thought. And I remember walking into Lenana School, silver box in one hand, hockey stick in another, and my rucksack on my back. And I went right into the middle of the quadrangle, and I put my things down because that's where we were left. And as I put my things down, 2 things happened immediately after. I saw 3 guys come. One took my box to the right, the other took my hockey stick to the left, and I was left standing in the quadrangle without anything. That was okay, but it didn't compare to what I was about to experience. You see, many of us think of school as the place where you get nurturing education, but it wasn't for me. I found pain in school. As a first-year rebel, I don't know if they call them that anymore, I was called to a house that was called Mitchell. And in that house, well, let's just say, that house was falling apart. And at the sound of 1, it was expected that down the corridor, every Form 1 would run. And you would all gather and you'd be given instructions to do various things. Sing the national anthem backwards, go out and get darkness and bring it back, go and bury a mosquito and bring it back to life, get into a locker that had grooves that coins were slotted in, and it was a jukebox, so you had to sing. And all of that was fine. But the one thing that wasn't fine was the abuse and the physical abuse that you had to go through. You see, for those of you who are old enough to remember, you'll remember breakdance. And one particular character you'll remember is Electric Boogaloo. But at Lenana, they had another style of Electric Boogaloo. They had sockets, kind of like the ones that are on the corner. But they didn't have covers. They just had exposed wires. And what they would do is they would pour water on the floor. And they would take cables and they would have you stand in the water. And you know what would happen. Take one. In the same school, you would have different other renditions of that same thing going on. But one day, I walked into the bathroom, and as I did my thing, I knew there was someone behind me. And the conversation that followed was something like this: take your pants down. And at that point I said, hell no. And what I did was I ran. Now, there are many things in life that make you, but there are some things in life that break you. And on this particular day, something in me was about to break, but I said no. And today, I'm going to do something completely unorthodox. And Agatha, Dawn, forgive me, I'm going to go off script. But I want Dawn to stand. And what this great man did was that he gave me refuge when I almost broke. And today, in front of all these people, and all the people who are watching, wherever they'll be watching, I want to honor you, Dawn, for you made room for this man. So it's interesting that Dawn then finds me and asks me to come and talk about fathers. After that incident, I was sure I was done with Lenana. And exactly what I did, for those of you who were in boarding school, there were sanatoriums, if those things still exist. So I went to the sanatorium, I had a problem with my knee, and I simply told the nurse, I need to go home, I need to get my knee checked, and I was out the door, never to return. And so I went home, and my mother took me to the hospital, checked the knee. Obviously, it wasn't anything. But I was home. So I came home, and I found my father. And it was time to go back to school. And my dad said, get ready, we're going to school. And I turned to Dad and I said, Dad, I ain't going back to school. And Dad looked at me and he said to me, why? I said, I'm not interested in school anymore if that's what school's about. And I remember he was sitting on his chair. He was reading his newspaper. And I was standing by the door. And he said to me, if you're a man, you will go back to school. I said, Dad, I'm not going to school. And he said, if you're not going back to school, you're not my son. Because I don't raise cabbages. It was so clear in my mind. Man, school. Cabbage, not my son. I looked at the door and I said, the decision is clear. I'm not your son. And I walked out. And I walked out and in my lovely maroon sweater, lovely khaki shorts, and walked down Langata Road, never forget. I left home with one prayer. I said, God, I don't know who or what I've just left, but all I know is that you are my God and you are my Father. And I ask this one thing, that whoever my Father is, you'll send him to me. And I'm walking down Langata Road, Uhuru Gardens, and I'm in the streets. You see, one of the things that we fail to pay attention to sometimes is that when we think of the people on the street that we call street children, we don't really think about who they are. I was one of them. But I think lucky for me, one of our neighbors who happened to have found me that evening, how Mrs. Otieno found me, I have no clue. But somehow she spotted me from a group and she realized that's Tendai. What's he doing there? And she came and we had a conversation and she took me and we ended up in her home. Now, Mrs. Otieno went and had a conversation with the folks. But I was sure and I was clear that I was done. But somehow Mrs. Otieno convinced my parents to allow me, and my dad, to allow me back into the home. And so I did exactly that. I went. But let me say plainly today, just because you're in a house with people who you call dad, mom, brother, and sister, doesn't make them mom, dad, brother, or sister. Because that was me. For 4 years, I lived in that home, but I was clear in my mind. I don't have a father. The pain, the anguish, the experience was stuff that would tear you apart. About the age of 16, I had a conversation with my mother. And my mother shared with me a dream that my grandfather, her father, had had on the day I was born. And remember, in those days, like Moniki said, there were no mobile phones. You see, my mother is Zimbabwean. And so my grandfather would have been in Zimbabwe. And he's praying. And he has an experience with God. And his words exactly were that God said to him that a priest had been born into his home. Now, my mother shared this story with me at the age of 16. And in my mind, I'm thinking, me? Priest? You, Mom, must be smoking something. That's not me. But I parked it because there was somewhere it sat in me that made me realize I need to come back to this one day. What was interesting about that conversation was what was to follow a couple of months later. When I found out that when I was 6 months in my mother's womb, that I almost died, or so it seemed, because of physical abuse. That, for me, was the straw that broke the camel's back. You see, when I finished high school, I was clear now. I've become a man. Guess what? It's time to leave, and this time, I ain't coming back. And so I left. Scholarship in one hand, sister in the other, and I see her right there, and we headed for the UK. And for 4 years, I was in the UK. And all I could think of was how to love a woman. In my entire time, I was sure that the only way that I could love a woman was the way my mother wasn't loved. I was wrong. University was an interesting experience. And I don't know what it is about university, but the girls in uni, they don't like romance. So I got the script wrong. And so 4 years later, I was sure two things needed to happen. One, I needed to change my script. But two, in spite of the fact that I had risen to the top of my game, in the Conservative Party, first African to become president of the Students' Union, I knew I needed to go home because there was something inside of me that needed to close. And so I left, I went back home, and I arrived and went straight to Mombasa and began my life in Mombasa. You know, for those of you who read the Bible, Mombasa for me in those 7 years from 2001 was like Laban, who had been told to go and find a wife. I worked for 7 years and I was cheated of my wages. And I left without a wife. But my point is this. By the time 2008 came, I needed to find closure. I knew something was not right within me. And so what I did was I began searching. And the first thing that I realized, I don't know if they still do it anymore, kind of a session like this, it was called Landmark in those days. And I went for the Landmark Forum. And I remember there was this big guy called Larry. And one of the things that Larry did was Larry would take you on. And I thought he used to have a microphone, kind of like this one. And he'd be like, come up to the mic. And so I went up to the mic and I started talking and I started telling him all my pain. And he said to me one thing. He says, listen. He says, you see this person that you're saying you didn't like, you're angry about? He says, guess what? You're actually becoming him. I was like, excuse me? I was like, you must be joking. Me? Become him? What do I need to do now? He says, you have to forgive him. Not because you want anything out of him, but because you need to love him and find peace within yourself. Immediately, out the door, picked up phone. I'm sorry I ever judged you. Please forgive me. Put the phone down. Still closed chapter. It's an interesting thing, and it's been said here in kindness, in jest, but I'll tell you one thing. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. Because you see, I wasn't looking. You wouldn't pay me to be married. There wasn't any model around me that looked like anything that I needed to emulate. And so I wasn't looking. I was happy dating. Until I found her. Now you see, she was seated like where she is right now. And her name is Terry. And when I turned and I saw her, all I can explain is that there was fire in my belly. And the truth of it is this. I saw my female side. And I never looked back again. And the truth is, when you find a woman who calls you by your name, by the very things that you know you have found in yourself. Not because a man has told you, but because it's been revealed to you by divine reality. You know you found your wife. And that's who Terry is to me. But we're just getting started. You see, Terry introduced me to my father. Terry introduced me to a man who's poured his life into me. Terry introduced me to Chibo Neil Ndukwe. And I remembered my prayer in 1991. You see, Crystal spoke, and I don't know if any of you listened, but I did. She spoke to me. Because you see, there's a reality that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor has it entered into the hearts of men for those who love God. That God is real. I hear us talk about our lives as human beings, and I ask myself a simple question. When did we forget the divine? When did we forget that He truly is our Father? Because for me, when I met her, she introduced me to Him. But Don and Agatha haven't given me enough time to tell you about Chibo. I could be here for days. And so I'm not going to even attempt. But this is how I'll put Chibo. He taught me how to love her. He taught me that the truth of a woman is in her womb. He taught me that what a woman carries is life. And that a woman can surround a man and make him who he is. He taught me to love. But above all, He taught me to stay true. You see, I wasn't looking, but the madness in me was still there from all the years of hate and anger, in spite of the fact that I'd found her. I almost lost you. But I had a father. You see, in 2013, all I had was Terry, our 8-month-old son, and a ragtag army that said, we can make this guy governor. And they tried. And I salute those 10,000 people who were with me, who heard my voice, thought that I was someone. But the one thing that my father Chibo taught me was to know and to understand that when you find a woman in your life that you love, hold on to her. She will fill a space in you that will make you know that you're a man. Because He made man male and female. And I think it's possibly the reason why last year I realized I needed to leave the Sultan and join Mumbi in Kirinyaga. Because I realized that there's something about the woman, but there's something even bigger that comes from a father who loves you and who shows you the reality of what it means to love a woman. Now, my story isn't the average story. And maybe many of you are thinking, okay, so who's this guy, Chibo? And where does he come from? Is he a myth? Is he a spiritual father? Is he a godfather? What is he? He's my father. And I love him. The one thing Chibo's taught me about his love is that he's shown me that you know no one else by who men say they are, but by who God says they are. And one thing Chibo's taught me, Dr. Mageria said it here very clearly. He said a child is like a clean slate. I have a different version. Everyone is a clean slate. And the thing that closure gives you is the ability to walk up to a man who they said, because guess what? All of us here arrived through a woman, and you are told, this is your father. You didn't decide that for yourself. So they told you, you didn't make that decision. And so the truth of the matter is, I now have a clean slate with Timothy, Mtana Leo. He may not be my father, but he's a man I love. Because my father is Chibo. And I remember my sisters and my brothers who I met in the area of Uhuru Gardens. I remember them because they too have a Father in heaven who thinks of them. And maybe when I'm done in Kirinyaga, if Sonko's still looking for a running mate, I just might consider. But I'll consider for this reason, because of those brothers and sisters who are not here with us, who are out there and who need a father. And if there's anything that is lacking within our political fabric of this country, it's fathers, but also in our homes. My story of fatherhood is a story of many. But the truth of the matter is this. When we find our fathers, they teach us how to love. When we find our fathers, they teach us to honor. But most importantly, when we find our fathers, they teach us to know no one by the flesh, but know them by the Spirit. I love you all. Thank you.